how do we know we made a right decision if nothing went wrong?
5:50 a.m. Pack all necessary gear. Transceiver, probe, shovel, down jacket, first aid kit, skins. I always want to know the product I'm using works 100% of the time, because then I can rely on it for every day I spend in the backcountry. Being well trained in avalanche rescue and knowing that I use the best avalanche safety equipment on the market adds extra security to my day. I want to learn how to play safe and ski another day.
The next presenter this evening is Eric Peitzsch. Eric is a research physical scientist at the U.S. Geological Survey Northern Rocky Mountain Science Center in West Glacier, Montana. He studies avalanches and snow, specifically wet snow avalanches, using drones for snow and avalanche research and using tree rings to investigate avalanche patterns through time. He received his PhD and MS from the Department of Earth Sciences at Montana State University. He's worked as a ski patroller at Alpine Meadows, as the director of the Flathead Avalanche Center, and currently oversees the Going to the Sun Road Avalanche program in Glacier National Park. His presentation this evening is titled, How Old Are People Who Die in Avalanches? A Look into Avalanche Fatalities in the United States from 1950 to 2018. Certainly a more sobering topic, but important to understand and take into account when we look at education and forecasting. So Eric, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks. And can you see the right screen?
Yep, you're all good.
Great. All right, well, thanks for the invitation to speak with everyone here tonight. And at least we could do it. It'd be better in person, but we're all here, so that's great. I'd like to thank first my co-authors, Sarah, of course, for important perspectives and insight. And I'll be using some of her ideas and slides later on in this presentation. Spencer and Ethan for the incredible data set that the CAIC maintains and their great discussion about those data. And then Carl for his assistance in developing the ideas and his earlier work with others looking into avalanche fatality trends. And there we go. All right. So why did we look at the ages of avalanche victims? So I noticed that colleagues and more importantly, friends were either involved in accidents or killed by avalanches. And these folks were around my age, not too old, but definitely not too young either, somewhere around the mid 30s to mid 40s, maybe. So I wondered, is it just because these are people close to me or is this really the case? So I went data hunting. And so, preventative strategies to guard against avalanches were designed to decrease avalanche fatalities. They now include decisions regarding road closure, as well as active triggering of avalanches with explosives near highways, railways, and developed ski areas. So this type of avalanche controls, prevents the development of unstable layers in the snowpack and results in fewer and less severe avalanches. This is a very good thing. Loads of great people like forecasters, patrollers, highway and railway workers they're working really hard in the field to protect the unsuspecting public traveling on roads and railways in avalanche terrain and at ski areas. And there was a marked decrease in fatalities among snowplow drivers, motorists, and inbound skiers as a result of these preventative avalanche mitigation measures. However, what about those of us that aren't unsuspecting and we're choosing to recreate in uncontrolled avalanche terrain? So since 1950, avalanches have killed 1,084 people in the United States. In the last 10 years, an average of 27 people per year died in avalanche accidents. So we teach this in avalanche classes, but you can see two marked jumps in fatalities in this time series. One around 1970 and the other around 1990. So it's really important to look at the data from 1990 to the present, in addition to the full data set or time series from 1950 to the present. Why? So we know that around 1990, there was a marked increase in snowmobile technology. Better sleds meant we could spend more time in shredding in places that are fun, places like avalanche terrain. These sleds allowed easier access. However, around this time, avalanche centers were starting to crop up in earnest and or become more prominent, and avalanche education was increasing in the United States. So we subset the time period from 1990 to account for both better technology and better warning and education services. So the construction of the data set began in 1960 with the Forest Service Avalanche Program's efforts to actually retrospectively compile these fatality data prior to 1960. The Forest Service continued to collect the data. The Westwide Avalanche Network digitized the data in 1972, and the Colorado Avalanche Information Center continues to manage the data set. So thanks to the CAIC for this valuable data set and for their contribution. These data are widely available to the public, and they, as I mentioned, they document 1,084 avalanche fatalities. However, ages were only recorded for 835 of those fatalities in this data set, and we're only current to the year 2012 for ages, with a few years lacking any data whatsoever. So we had to go looking for the rest and came up with a total of 900 avalanche fatalities with ages associated with them. So how did we do this? We used the incredible resource, the Snowy Torrents from the American Avalanche Association. And this is a really great series of books that have been published and are still being published, where we can learn a lot from these accident reports. We also used the good old interwebs. I could sit at my desk and look for media articles, as opposed to the dusty basement of a library looking at microfiche. I think I just dated myself there by using the word microfiche, but it's such a good word. Anyways, we came up with 900 fatalities. So first, we looked at the data to see if there were any important change points through time, through that whole time series. And it turns out that 1991 was indeed a statistically significant change point in the time series. So we analyzed the full data set, as I mentioned, from 1950 to 2018, and from 1991 to 2018. We looked for trends in those time periods for changes in overall fatalities, age, and activity, like backcountry skiers versus snow machiners relative to age. Not all of the data met the assumptions that were necessary for good old-fashioned linear regression for those of you that are so inclined, so we use other techniques that are listed here. When looking at ages, we broke the ages into decades like this. We also took a look at breaking it up in other ways, like 25 to 35, 36 to 45, et cetera. But those resulted in similar findings. So what did we actually find? So first, and most importantly, we found no significant trend in the number of overall fatalities from 1991 to 2018. And this is awesome. This is a really cool finding. This means that the number of fatalities has remained flat through this period. And so Birkeland and others actually showed this first, but this puts avalanche forecasting and education efforts into perspective. It actually means that they're working, and especially when you consider the increase in backcountry use. So we don't have numbers on the actual numbers on backcountry users. It's too terribly difficult to do. But Birkeland and others, they used Avalanche Center website visits as a proxy or a substitute, and found an average of an 8-fold increase in visits through this same period, 1991 to 2000, roughly around 2018. So that's one way of looking at it and saying that the use has increased, but the fatalities have not. So this is a really important point and one that I want to stress. So it's not all bad, but on to age. So what else did we find? We found that the average age from 1950 to 89 was around 28, and from 1990 to 2018 was 34. So we have an increase there. On the lower left here, you can see the distribution of ages of fatalities, with the bulk of the distribution of ages in our data set between 20 and 40 years of age. So just a few plots. I promise they're not too difficult to get through. So pay attention to the red line. That's all you got to do. What do you notice? That the red line increases through time. And again, looking at the 1950 to 2018 period, it increases, and then as well from 1990 to 2018. So this suggests an increase in the median age through time. So over time, or over the entire sample period, and during both periods, the ages of avalanche victims rose, even during the modern period. So we broke that down into age categories, as I mentioned. And again, we're focusing on the modern period from 1990 to 2018 because it's more relevant for us. And you can see that the two bottom panels there, the one on the left is 30 to 39 and the one on the right is 40 to 49. And they both exhibit a statistically significant positive trend through that time period. So ages 30 to 39 and 40 to 49. Whereas under 20 and then 20 to 29, we didn't see a significant trend in either direction, nor did we for other age categories. So what we're looking at here are the proportions of the two age groups. So 20 to 29 that account for the greatest number of avalanche, and 30 to 39. And these two account for the greatest number of avalanche fatalities from 1950 to 2018. The black bars indicate the 20 to 29 and the gold bars represent the 30 to 39 age group. So from this plot, you can see that it appears that around 1990, again, the two proportions became more evenly distributed. And with the 30 to 39 age group containing a greater proportion overall since 2008. So is 30 the new 20 or is 40 the new 20? I hope so. All right. So why? Why is the age increasing? So in our data set, we looked at activity. We looked at activity to see if it can help explain the increase in age. Specifically, we analyzed backcountry tours, and that includes side country tours as well, versus snow machiners. You might think that this might help explain it because sleds are expensive and perhaps sled owners are older and maybe more financially stable. Well, not so much. So I'm going to explain these to you again. They're not too terribly difficult. The plots on the top show the difference in age between backcountry and, again, side countries included, tours and snow machiners. So the red box there on the far left panel is our backcountry tours, and the light blue box throughout is our snowmobilers. And the thicker black line in the middle of those boxes indicates the median age. And what we found is there is no significant difference in the median age between those two activities. And if you look at the panel on the right, all other activities versus snowmobilers or snow machiners in general, we include snow bikes in that as well. You can see that there's no statistically significant difference in those either. So those two plots up there tell us there is no difference in age between any of those activities. So the bottom plot shows the number of fatalities, again, of backcountry tours in red versus the snow machiners in blue. And you can see there's a fair amount of variability or spread in the number of snowmobile fatalities through time. But backcountry tours kind of remains pretty high, save for maybe a few years in this whole time series. And so the bottom line here is that activity can't explain this increase in age. So we did what we could with the available data that we had in terms of trying to explain why. So we can now only sort of speculate and perhaps think of other explanatory reasons. And it's important to note that we didn't find any of the following, which I'm about to discuss, to be reasons age is increasing, but I'm simply presenting it to provoke some thought. We don't know the demographics of the backcountry traveling population, so we're kind of limited there to really expand upon it too much. Perhaps one of the reasons, is it just lifestyle in general? Are people having kids later? Are they making more time for leisure in their 30s and 40s rather than, just the roaring 20s? What about education? Are people actually refreshing their avalanche knowledge? So think about, your own sort of backcountry career when you first started your avalanche education, perhaps with an avalanche awareness course. Maybe taking a level 1 or even a level 2. How long has it been since you actually took your level 1 or level 2, and have you refreshed that? So are people taking a level 1 earlier in their backcountry career and then just letting their knowledge lapse, not taking formal education? Sarah mentioned, experience, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, experience versus expertise. But basically the take home point here is that the tool would be to continue to refresh your avalanche knowledge by continuing education, like NSAW. So you're doing a great job. Or even taking another level 1 or level 2. And some Avalanche providers even offer refresher courses as well. So when Sarah and I talked a little bit about this stuff, she came up with, or tried to relate this idea of sunk cost to, perhaps why the age is increasing. And I think it's a pretty compelling argument. We have no evidence for it, but again, this is just to provoke some thought and discussion. But this trap it's a trap, as Sarah had mentioned in her talk. It's all about investment and expected return. For example, you bought this $15,000 sled, you came all the way to Montana, you're gonna ride in Cook City, and all of that, cannot have been for naught. You put all this investment in. It's as if everything leading up to this moment should influence this particular moment. But if you think about it, what you've put in is already sunk. It's lost, it's gone. It has no bearing on the future, because whether it goes well or not, you don't get back your investment, and they're actually separate. So similarly, think of it this way: if a 40-year-old used to be an amazing skier has one day where his family lets him go do whatever he wants in the mountains, the pressure is pretty high for him or her to have a really good day. The more it takes to get to the top of that mountain, the more pressure that person feels to get their money's worth, so to speak. Humans in general do a pretty bad job of overestimating how much something will improve our lives, and underestimating how easily we might recover from a loss. So it's a fairly big imbalance there at times. So we think getting to ski that ridiculously good-looking line will change our lives forever for the better, and we envision that having to ski down our skin track will just completely devastate us, and that's actually not the case. So we've all heard about complacency before, and I'm throwing perspective into this as well. And what if older backcountry travelers are simply more complacent because they've done this so many times before? And Sarah touched on this, I think, from someone's question. But might this have a possible effect? So does experience actually equal expertise? Perhaps it does in some cases, and perhaps it doesn't in others. When we think about frequency, we're thinking about the frequency of an event, but we're actually referencing the frequency with which we can recall these events, not the actual frequency of those events occurring. And so humans have a difficult time sort of understanding frequency and probability, especially when the occurrence of something like avalanches extends beyond the time span of human life. So think of a really big avalanche cycle, a 100-year event that extends beyond something that one human can remember. Or a really tricky snowpack that might be really rare and may not often form in your neck of the woods. And so something that you typically do, for example, putting a skin track in a certain area, might not be, you've done that for years, and now you're an older backcountry tourer and that this is where you go. But now perhaps the snowpack in any given year, if it's a tricky one that doesn't always form, maybe it's not the right place to put that skin track. And hindsight bias. So obviously the backcountry is a wicked learning environment where when something goes wrong, it can be really, really bad. We don't necessarily get feedback on when we're too close to the edge, but didn't go over the edge. We ski that slope and it was great. Powder was fantastic, but we don't really know how close we were to actually triggering an avalanche or hitting that sweet spot on that slope. And we might not know because there wasn't an avalanche. So if we go through our backcountry career without any feedback, negative feedback like that, or positive feedback rather, when we get older, we might have a case of overconfidence or trust in the snowpack even. And this influences our risk management, or can influence our risk management. I, for example, have had a few close calls. And this has dramatically influenced my own risk tolerance as I get older. So to kind of wrap it up here, some of the conclusions are that there from 1991 to the present, there's no trend in overall avalanche fatalities. The overall fatalities, but the average age of avalanche victims has increased. The 30 to 39, as well as the 40 to 49 age group, has or exhibits a positive trend. And there's no clear pattern associated with primary activity. So is 35 the new 25? And then, some of the implications here for forecasters or forecast centers, do we need to message to multiple age audiences? And then for educators, do we need to provide more refreshers to older or experienced backcountry travelers? And do we need to adapt our messaging as well? So that's all I've got. And I'll gladly take some questions if there are any.
Thanks, Eric. So first off, I want to ask, your data set is on US fatalities. Have you seen any other age-related trends or comparable work with data sets out of the European Alps, Canada, or elsewhere?
Yeah, so there's been some work looking at ages in Switzerland and France, and they actually exhibit pretty similar patterns in terms of age. They didn't go into detail in looking at these ages, sort of the same detail that we did, but they reported their median increase, their median ages, and there is an increase through time in their data sets as well.
And in your study, did you evaluate the ages of companions in accidents?
The ages of companions, so
ski partners.
Right. So what, like the difference in ages when they're traveling together?
Yeah. Did you, or is that something you looked at? And if it was, did you see anything noticeable in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, those data don't exist for at least in this data set. Where I think you're asking where we have the ages of people involved in the party when there was a fatality, and but that would be really interesting to know for sure. What the sort of age composition was of each traveling party.
Yeah. John here is wondering, he says the fact that fatalities haven't increased over the past 30 years would indicate that they've actually decreased per capita on a per capita basis. Is that correct? And do we have data on how backcountry use has increased over that time? My assumption is that it has increased by a lot, which means that the fatality rate per backcountry user may have decreased dramatically.
Yeah, that's a great question. I touched on it a little bit. And so Carl Birkeland and others a few years ago kind of looked into this. And so as I mentioned, they used Avalanche Center website visits as sort of a proxy for backcountry use. And, it's really hard to get those data, or to actually know, but we all see it, it's sort of anecdotal information or data that we see, plenty of people out there and more than we have in the past. And so, we can probably assume that there is an increase. We don't know the exact numbers. But you're right, like what you're saying is correct, and that, per capita. So if you think about it, with an increase in backcountry use, then yes, the fatality rate per person is likely decreased. But again, since we don't have the sample numbers or population numbers for the backcountry user, then we can't really definitively say, but it's a pretty good assumption.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Eric. That's all we have time for questions this evening. But thank you again.